Welcome back to the BookEnds YouTube channel. I'm James McGowan.
Hi, I'm Jessica Faust.
We are literary agents who have taken our popular blog to YouTube to discuss all things publishing. And today we are talking about our process from query to offer of representation, walking you through it. It's a lot.
It's a lot. Well, I think that authors understandably get frustrated because how long the process takes. But well, let's get into it.
Yeah. So I mean, the most obvious place to start is you've done your query letter. You've watched all our videos on submitting. Now it picks up where we come in, right? Like we are reading your query letter, and that process of reading queries is different for every single agent.
Yeah.
When we read them, even whether we use Query Manager or email, it's all very different.
How we read them? Do we read them in order of which they come in? Do we read them by mood? Do we read them by genre?
And I will go so far as to say that it doesn't particularly matter to you as the querier how we read those queries.
No, not at all. It's all just, I think we're just going to give you an idea of what it's like from our end, really. Yeah. So for me, when I go through queries, well, you and I really read a lot of queries quickly. I think we're both pretty fast. We keep a pretty tight query inbox. I often say my query inbox is like my social media. When I'm sitting somewhere and I want to occupy myself with my phone, I don't really always go to Instagram. I hardly ever go to Twitter. I actually go to Query Manager. That's where I sort of spend my time.
For me, it's like that task on the to-do list that is never quite checked. You're always working on it. So that's where my brain goes immediately. Like, well, I could just finish that. That's the workaholic in me. But I don't have that set time where let's sit down and do queries every time this week. I just sort of, when I have a moment, I'm popping in. When I'm procrastinating, I'm popping in. If I'm sitting on the couch doing nothing, I'm popping in. It's just really when it comes to me.
Yeah, and for me, I always tend to read the nonfiction queries first.
Because they're easier to read.
Yes, they're easier to read. It's a lot of it relies on very objective. I need to know the author's platform. The idea is going to sell or it's not from my perspective, or I can sell it or I cannot. So they tend to be pretty quick. I also don't get as many.
Yeah, I don't get as many either because most nonfiction authors may not necessarily be querying, but I think that it's one of those things in querying where there is an instinctive right answer. Like you just know, like, I think I can sell that, or that really interests me. Whereas fiction, there's a lot of gray area.
Yeah, absolutely. So then when I get to my fiction queries, it really kind of sometimes depends on my mood, but I just tend to open them and read them and open them and read them. I will make my decision pretty quickly. And I will tell you, when I'm requesting material, I don't always or usually read pages.
I never read
pages. So, right, see, there you go. Yeah, I mark some queries sometimes that I need to read the pages because I'm unsure. And
then I come back to it and I make my decisions. So I never do it.
Right. But typically I don't read the pages. I just read the query. And if I am excited about it, I request more material. And I guess what excites me about the query is really different for every book. But I think it's important to know, because I think authors get really hung up on, is it the query or is it the book? Is it the query or is it the book? 99% of the time it's about the book. It's not about the query.
Well, we've on this channel too, likened it before. It's no different than when you go into a bookstore and you're searching through the shelves. You're just reading something, like, not doing it for me, and you put it back on the shelf. So that's really that's how I approach queries. There's that added layer of, do I think I can sell it? But I usually don't get there in a query letter because you got to read the book in order to know.
And the truth is, I just took on a new client, and when I went back over the query and read the query, it's not a great query from a query perspective, but it had the key elements in there that made me want to read the book. It had those things that may not have appealed to another agent, but definitely appealed to me.
And there's always going to be room in a query to make it better, to tweak this, to bring this part out. Like there's just so much going on in a book that a query can always have that possibility. It really is, like you said, like it's persuasive writing. do I want to read more? Yes, you do. Like your query is supposed to tell me I do.
Yeah, and I would say most of the time, if you're getting passes and you've done the query research and you're here watching this channel, it's probably not your query. It probably is your book. But that was a complete digression. So then
what else is new?
the query excites us. We're in the bookstore. We're like, wow, this is a book I want to spend a couple hours reading.
Right.
So me personally, I always request the full manuscript.
Oh yeah, because I cannot, just the completionist in me cannot request the partial and then like love it and have to wait for somebody to send the rest of it.
It just feels for me like a waste of everybody's time. Back in snail mail query, ancient history, it made more sense to request a partial before requesting the full because you didn't want the author to commit
money was involved.
Time and the money and everything to print and send a full.
Right.
If you only read a chapter.
Gosh, and querying must have been so expensive.
So expensive. And I mean, people complain now how slow it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
imagine having to wait for the USPS.
Both ways. Like you would snail mail a letter, which could take like a week to get there, right? And then it would take me, what, a month to read the query.
Yeah.
And then a few days to print out my letters and responses and put them in the envelope and send it back through USPS. And if it was a request, now you had to send the partial.
It's kind of back and forth.
So it's funny to me when people complain about how slow it is now.
Yeah. Yet another digression.
Well, we're having fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, so then we both request the full. How much do you read?
Oh gosh, this is gonna get me in trouble. I'm not gonna lie, this can get me in trouble. It really depends. I will say if I'm not feeling it, I usually don't get past like 30, 40 pages.
Same.
Max.
Same. But when you're reading it and you're feeling it, how fast do you start to get really excited and you're like, oh, wow.
So, okay, you know, I've heard another agent say this online. You ever, like, when you look back on the books that you make an offer of representation on, I knew from the first page. I feel that way about every novel I've ever offered on. Like I knew from the first page that it was something special. And I like when I look back, you have that 2020. When I'm reading it, it's about that 30, 40 page mark where I'm like, I've not put this down yet. It's good. Yeah. And then I kind of, that's when things start to like speed up for me.
And then you're reading, then for me, it becomes reading out of fear.
You're right. Like, I gotta go quicker.
Well, and also I'm loving it so much. My fear is, oh, please don't fall apart. Please don't fall apart. Please don't fall apart.
It's so funny. So I think of you all the time because we all know, we talked about it on the channel, you always gravitate toward endings that need a lot of work. And I saw, it was a TikTok, I saw it recently where somebody was like, how it ends is not how it was. And I try to keep that in mind when I'm reading submission, because just because the ending wasn't great doesn't mean the whole book wasn't great, right? So like some of that can be fixed. But I always have you in the back of my mind because I'm like, is it gonna fall apart? But it's okay if it falls apart. Like, do I love it enough to fix it? Like, there's all of those thoughts running through my mind.
Well, there's a lot to that. So I took on an author once, and there were a lot of things in the book that needed fixing. There was a whole plot line that needed to go away, and we had a great phone call when I offered. But essentially, the elements that I loved in the book were so strong that I knew it was a book that could become all of those elements in its entirety. And the stuff I didn't like and I didn't think was working were completely separate. They weren't matching those elements. So I could see the magic in the book.
Yeah.
And like you said, from early on.
Yeah, it's usually very early on, but there's never, it's never the same when you're reading two different submissions. Like when you're reading submissions, it's never the same experience. Like there's always going to be a different point in the book where you're like, this could work, or your vision starts to develop, or things start to change focus for you. Like it's just, every book is different when you're reading that submission where you're like, oh, this one could work. Some books you just end up 150 pages in, you don't realize it. And then you're like, holy crap. And then some you're like, all right, 25 pages in, this has everything I'm looking for, but it needs all of this. Like every book is different.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's really about the reading experience. It's like, I know I'm going to offer based on the reading experience I'm having. I
was talking to another agent here who was reading something and they were like, this is everything I want, but I don't love the writing. And I'm like, well, how far are you? And they're like, I'm like halfway through. I'm like, "Well, maybe you like it a little more than you think you do. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
about whether you get wrapped up into it. Can other readers get wrapped up into it? We don't have to love every single element of that book.
No, and I compare it to the books we read for pleasure that anybody watching us buys at the bookstore. You love books in different ways. And, your three favorite books can be three very different things. Or the books, when we do our videos on the books we've read, usually we pick the books that we like the best, but how much we like them and how we like them
And
are
why?
completely different. Yeah, are completely different from book to book, and how much they stick with us. I
I
might,
can be a sucker for a like what I think is not a great plot, but a really good voice. Like and just be pulled along with that voice. Like I could make a book a 5-star read based on how great that voice was and
yeah,
how it pulls
yeah.
you along. So I mean, it just depends, and it's like a non-answer, but
But we know it
publishing's a
when we're reading
non-answer.
it. We know when we know very early on that it's a book we want to offer on, and then it's really about hoping that it holds up enough that at the end we still have that same feeling. Really,
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's just an instinctive moment where, okay, here's how we can explain it. There's that moment when you're reading, when I approach every submission as a reader. Like, I just want to sit down and read
yeah.
a book.
Hmm.
So there's that moment when you're reading and your agent brain shifts on, right? And you have a more equal balance between the two.
Yeah,
And then that's when I'm like, oh, okay, like I'm thinking about who to send it to,
yeah.
what I can change in it. Like, give revisions based on like all of that. And once that like light clicks on, then I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, my ears perk up, like I'm paying a little more attention. And then that makes me think like this could go somewhere.
Yeah, I'm starting to take notes at that point of this editor will want it. Sometimes mid submission, I will even end up on Publishers Marketplace looking for editors,
Always.
which is ridiculous because now I'm researching who I'm going to make. I'm making my submission list
Have you
before
ever
I've even
talked
finished
about
the
a
book.
book to an editor? I'm like, I don't represent this client, but I just love this book.
Yes, yes. And then I also do this thing where I don't want to post it on Slack because I know if I post about it, I'll jinx it and everyone will be like, how'd the book turn out? And I'm like,
Yeah.
so yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, I think that is really the point when we know we really want to work with this author in this book.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah,
There's always a lot of emphasis on the sample pages, and they're always really polished, right? And then we get to that point in the book where it feels like, oh, we didn't spend as much time from here
yeah.
on out. That's why we always say, like, don't focus in on those first 10 or 50 pages.
Mhm.
Focus on the whole book because you don't know where that point is. You don't know where the point is where you really hook that reader or where
Yeah.
you could potentially lose that reader. So give equal attention to the entire book. You could lose me at 200 pages. You could lose me at 50. You could lose me at the first page. So I think really giving even attention to the entirety of the book is crucial because of what we're talking about, because there is no like guarantee of when we'll stop or continue reading.
Yeah, because we both read plenty of submissions where the middle of the book makes a turn that just blows it
Yeah,
for us.
yeah,
Absolutely.
totally.
So then we finished the book. We've posted it on Slack because we are so excited to talk about it.
Usually.
And then typically it's an email to the author, right? That's
Well, it depends on who you ask, because sometimes I'm rattling that email off before I finish the book. Like
yes.
sometimes I cannot help it. Usually in that case, I'll take a look at a synopsis and I'll be like, okay, before I really put cart before the horse, is it going where I think it's going?
Yeah.
And if it is, then sometimes I'm rattling that email off and then I'll finish reading and pull everything together. But yes, generally speaking, you finish the book before you email the author. Set up a time to talk. I know before my time, it was more of an impromptu call, right?
God, I miss those days when you would just pick up the phone and like blindly call the author and they'd pick up the phone and you'd introduce yourself and there was that and you'd offer representation. Now it's a little bit more, it's less of a surprise party and more plans.
I've only I think done a surprise call once or twice, but I think I think the more planned call has a lot of perks to it. Like things can be a bit more planned out for the author, for the agent, like everything is, well, for the agent it's planned anyway. But like it's a bit more of a regimented, like formal interview experience kind of.
Well, this was before we had email.
Yeah.
Unless I sent a snail mail letter.
Right. I will be calling you on this date. Stay by your phone.
I had no other option.
That's funny. So what do you do to prepare yourself? Like when you decide you're going to offer, what do you do to prepare?
I actually have a little worksheet, so I don't get nervous myself on the call. Gosh, I feel like I'm giving away the secrets here, but I will actually make notes on the worksheet on things like, I'll make sure I know the title. I'll make sure the key author names or character names are in front of me, and the author name actually too. But I don't want to make the call and be talking about a character, and I can blank out on those calls as much as everybody else. And I'm like, and then the character, what was her
name?
Or Josie or
we're just as excited and nervous too, so that's only natural. And also we kind of read submissions when it's getting good, like it can like switch into fever dream for a minute, like especially if we're reading super fast. So it's only natural that not everything sticks perfectly in our brain.
Yeah, and so then we prepare the author call. I'd like to go into it with some preliminary thoughts on any revisions I might see, especially if they're going to be major. I feel, for me anyway, it's important to give the author some of that. So I'm preparing all of those notes before the call. And then I always give the option of a phone call or a Zoom call.
Yeah, lately I've been doing more Zoom calls. It feels a bit like it's just easier to connect and like read stuff on the face. And
yeah,
I've been enjoying Zoom offer calls.
Yeah, I honestly prefer it better than phone now. And now when I get on a phone call, I feel like because I can't see the person's face, I feel like I struggle a little bit more.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And you also like, I feel like there's just all of that body language and facial expressions that you're missing out.
Yeah.
That is, especially in the offer call, that can trigger confidence or like tell you how things are going. If someone's confused about something, like there's a lot there that you can really dive into a bit more on the offer call.
Totally.
So
but we don't want to dive into the offer call in this video because we want to do that in another video.
Yes, we have another video coming up next week, so keep an eye out for that one.
Yeah. So that's the process that at least you and I go through when making the decision to offer.
We've got those basic steps, but again, just stressing that everything is different for every book. It could, especially the timeline is, I think, what I really want to stress. It could be a couple weeks, it could be a couple months. It really does depend on the agent and when they're getting into that book and that query letter. So it's not indicative of any level of excitement if it comes a month or two later. Then
no, I think that's a really important point, because one agent might have free time the minute that manuscript comes in and is able to jump on it, while another agent may be caught up in a million different things, and while they want to jump on it, it takes a lot longer. So
yep, exactly why everyone should get 2 weeks.
So
anyway, yes, thanks so much for watching. We hope this was a helpful peek behind the curtain. Again, keep your eyes peeled next Wednesday for our next video, and we're going to be talking about the offer call and specifically what we look for in the offer call. So we hope to see you back here next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
We'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you, because that was a flumble.
Bye.